I am, finally, brave enough to post this. I do not care about the consequences. I may be arrested and prosecuted for treason. I shall not use my real name. You can call me Raresh, Sergeant Raresh Buzescu of the Romanian Army. This is what happened to me in October 2022. I was in a military unit in the delta of the Danube, in the north of the Dobrogea region of Romania, under the border with Ukraine. A little bit of context, for those unfamiliar with the places. That region of Ukraine is southern Bessarabia, sandwiched between Romania and the Republic of Moldova, and it used to be Romanian territory. It has had a turbulent past, belonging during the centuries to many states, being strategically important. In those days, a lot of confusion and fear were present in Romania. Being close to war, rumors of incidents made things very tense. People were afraid. Several Romanian military aircraft were brought down. The Ukrainian forces admitted they did it accidentally. Romania, being a NATO country, any incident like this could degenerate into a war with either Russia or Ukraine and Romania to be in the front line of destruction of World War III. That night we heard explosions before the alarm was set. It seems some missiles coming from the north of the border hit Romanian targets. It was a chilly autumn evening. It would not be the last incident of this sort. We did not know if they were the Ukrainians or the Russians. The colonel summoned us to prepare for marching to the target. The delta of the river Danube is split between Romania and Ukraine. It is one of the last true wild ecosystems in Europe, an official biosphere reservation. It is, basically, a huge marshland where the Danube splits in smaller channels until it flows into the Black Sea. We followed orders, of course, in silence in the thicket. The explosions stopped. Some fires in the distance were visible. We could not make out if they were across the border or not. Suddenly, gunshots were heard not very far. We were ordered to be prepared for combat. Another military unit was pretty close. They were dispatched first. When we finally reached the location of the first flames, we could see that there was an explosion earlier in the evening on Romanian soil. On the other side of the border, things were burning as well. Our comrades from the other unit have reached the location. Some were already fallen, dead or wounded. In fact, most of them were down. It was here. War. For real. For the first time. It felt unreal. I was a soldier. I knew this was my purpose, but it was not supposed to be like this. It felt unreal also. It did not expect it. I mean, in Romanian history, as we were taught in school, Romanians fought bravely against our enemies, against the Ottomans, the Hungarians, the Soviets, and the Nazi. But then at least it was clear whom and why we were fighting. Now we did not. Finally, we found a living soldier. He was breathing heavily when the colonel shouted at him, "Report! What has happened?" The private answered, "They attacked us. They fought each other on the other side. Then they came to us." The Russians? We don't know. We were bombarded and they came shooting. They looked insane and fired at us like they had rabies, honestly. At this point, he was breathing hard. The colonel left him, looked around in the silence and ordered us to cross the bridge into Ukrainian territory. We obeyed. We were soldiers. Soldiers obey orders. But we knew what this meant. A part of me wanted to just flee. No, I was not afraid of death or physical injury. I was afraid of being part of this and suffering and dying sensely and shamefully. I would have preferred to have been dead by some previous disease or something to have killed me before getting into this. I even hoped a loose bullet would take down now before being engaged in the fight. I was not old. I was in my late 20s, but I wanted to die with a clean conscience then to get on with this. I thought of running and being put to trial like a deserter. Perhaps I would have been executed. The thoughts rose up one after the other in my mind. We crossed the bridge and the colonel brought us, as the last remains of daylight disappeared in thicket. I didn't even know if the colonel knew what he wanted. It doesn't matter anyway. Trees formed like a small forest on the other side of the border, almost complete darkness and chill. A shadow creeped upon my heart. It was something else, something different from what I felt before. A fear not just of death, a fear not just of dishonor. It was something else that engulfed all my previous fears, worked alongside them and made them stronger. Then it started. They ran and fired. I could not make out if they shouted in Russian or Ukrainian, or both. I do not understand either, and the uniforms were not clear. They fired at us, each other, in every direction. Colonel ordered to engage in fire. We complied. I fired at any non-Romanian soldier I could see holding the gun towards us. Some seemed to have been Ukrainian, some Russian. I did not care. It did not matter. Some of them were hit. Some of us were hit. I became numb. I desperately knew I had not just to protect myself, but my comrades. At least this was something I could do, something to hold on to, and not just pointing the gun at me and finishing me off. It seems I already killed several people the first time in my life. Were they allies? Were they foes? I did not know. Something was tearing inside my soul, a part of me. Yes, I have made a great mistake joining the military. I was not made for this, at least not in this situation. I think I could have been a war hero, but in World War II, not in World War III. This was my thought, as the Russians and/or Ukrainians mingled with us. I felt no physical pain, as they hit me chaotically, and I responded as non-chaotical as I could. A warm liquid touched my hand gently. I realized it came from my shoulder. I was hit by a bullet, and did not even realize it. The enemies looked, like the comrade said earlier, like being on rabies, their eyes wide in terror, mouths opened. They charged at us, but were also running from us. As we entered the woods, the clash became even more chaotic, as darkness engulfed us, and little to no light was visible. My heart was beating hard, as we lost it and started running with no sense deeper inside the woods, like being driven. Incidents became fewer, the clash went cold, and silence took over almost completely. I continued to run deeper, in the darkness. I heard callings in Romanian. I asked one of them, then decided not to, in order not to attract attention to myself. It was cold, bitter darkness. Suddenly, I hit something, in the dark. Something that blacked my way, like some kind of net that held me fiercely. No, I was not tangled, more like glued to it. I tried to force my way out of it, but the more I forced it, the less I was able to release myself. My mind felt almost completely helpless of handling this new thing, and it started to shut down. Yet, like a faint whisper, a thought came to my mind. Take the knife, combat knife, from your boot while you still can, and cut it out, fast. I obeyed the thought and managed to get the knife. Fortunately, my right arm was almost completely free of the thing, and I was able to grab it and started cutting. It was hard to achieve this at first, but I think it was good that it was hard. If it came too easy, my mind would not have calmed down, would have not settled down, and I would have restarted running blindly. I was desperate at first, seeing that it was so hard to cut, especially since I clearly felt I needed to get out as fast as I could. As I struggled with the process, I started to become aware of my situation and surroundings, and even if I knew I had every reason to finish it as soon as possible, I was able to evaluate my situation and what was around me more calmly. Few people were around at this point. Few gunshots, some screams from time to time. The darkness felt unreal and intoxicating. I tried to get rid of this thought, as was starting to get hold of myself, but I could not escape it, and something like whispered in my thoughts, something very bad will happen to me soon, if I do not get out soon from there. Indeed, as I was getting close to cutting it completely, I heard a rumble in the trees behind this net, from up, towards me. For the last 2 seconds, before breaking free, I even caught a glimpse of something moving, but I escaped and went backwards. This time, I was determined not to lose myself so easily, and although I was far from being safe, I walked slowly and eventually decided to stop and evaluate. The almost complete darkness felt unnatural, like some sort of black mist that, once entering the lungs, made my mind like being into some sort of drug. I thought this could be chemical weapons or something. I stood on the spot and opened a flashlight from my haversack. I was able to bring the light only for a few meters in front of me, like the light got lost into that mist. I was able to see the trees around, no person in sight. I went towards what seemed to me like the way out, slowly looking around. Some small sounds were heard in the trees. Suddenly, in front of me, in the upper branches of the tree, I saw something white, standing there. It was shaped like a human, but engulfed like some sort of a whitish or greyish shroud, with legs tied together like an Egyptian mummy. It twitched a little, and then I realized that the same matter the shroud was made from is the same as the leftovers of the net on my hands and uniform. The shape in the tree moved, and I realized pretty fast it was not moving on its own. Something moved the shape from behind, and I could see a dark thing, almost the size of the human shape, covering it, and some dark, articulated arms taking over the white shape. I could not bring myself to move and stop watching. The dark creature stabbed the white shape in the chest area and started some sort of sucking from it voraciously. Dark fluid came out to the ground, and a striking, disgusting smell of blood mixed with something I did not know what it was. It was a spider, eating its still living prey. I turned my flashlight around me, around the trees, and noticed that this tree was not the only one with victims wrapped in cocoons. My blood ran cold when I realized that above me, in the canopy, the spiders were moving. How many of them there were, I do not know. I started to run towards what seemed to me like the exit of the woods. No living person was in sight, although I could see corpses all over the place. From time to time, some cocoon swung in the wind or had fallen to the ground. I stumbled into one, almost falling. I could feel that almost nothing but bones were left, engulfed into some goo that stuck to my boot, like a glue sticking the tip of my foot with the cocoon, and I had used the second boot to let go, while I could hear clearly something above me coming down, pretty close. I managed not to lose myself and escape just before an unbearable stench almost touched me. Less than a minute later, in front of me, on the trail, a thick web with something really big moving on the other side. An insidious sensation of deep danger came over me as I watched the thing from behind. I went backwards, looking behind and around me for a way out on another track where I could see no web or creature. But this was a really bad idea, as I stumbled more into the woods, especially since I was unfamiliar with the place. I stopped in my tracks for a while, trying to figure out what to do. I listened around me, faint noises around me, scratches not very far, but not too close either. No living soldiers, only dead, or dying, from time to time. Where was everybody? Has someone escaped? There was no way of knowing. I was trained to face difficult situations, but this was beyond all I ever imagined, as this new enemy was unlike any I prepared to face. I needed to meet someone. Anybody. I sat down, listened, and sniffed. Yeah, I sniffed. Strange odors, marsh combined with weird, unpleasant smells. The darkness itself felt unnatural in itself, like it was absorbing light, so to say. The flashlight could not reach far. It was like it faded into some fluid. Was I afraid of death? Yes, I was. But that was not all. I would have preferred a death that I could understand, a death I could expect, if it makes sense. But not this. I did not understand what was going on, and that made me feel that all my experiences, all my training was not just useless, but also senseless. I kneeled on one leg and looked at the ground, not knowing what to do. I listened, trying to calm myself even further, so that my rational mind shall find a way. Then I heard a rustle in the tree next to me. I had the first impulse to just run, but something in mine told me it was a bad idea. I do not know why. I turned back slowly, towards the source of the sound, making sure not to point the light directly at it. I was clearly a spider. It was almost 2 meters long, and it dropped something towards me. I snapped and jumped towards the place I came from, but another of those creatures was in there. Then I heard gunshots from sideways, sounded like an AKM. Bullet flew above my head, like someone aimed at the creature behind me. It gave a shriek, and it seemed to stop. I dared not to move, waiting for a ceasefire. And it did. I heard footsteps coming fast towards me. I noticed my benefactor. It was a tall, muscular woman with long black hair. I noticed the Ukrainian flag on her uniform. She came fast towards me, grabbed my arm and pushed me towards some bushes I had not looked before. I let her guide me. It felt like she knew the place. I could not ask anything. We were silent. She gasped for air as she pushed me. "I hope it is clear there. We shall see," she said. "What to be clear?" I asked. "A small underground shed or refuge," she replied. "I think I can find it." My flashlight was a clear advantage, being able to see it, even if at a short distance, the webs, and we were able to avoid them. Those things were in the trees mostly, not on soil fortunately, even if at some point a pretty large one charged at us. "I think we missed it. We need to go back," she added, and turned us around. I could hear a rustle behind us, but not too close. It felt like we moved in circles for about 5 minutes. I felt much longer, but I'm sure it could not have been more. Until she knocked with her boot, something almost completely covered in fallen autumn leaves. We stopped. "Here it is," she said, as she started to remove the leaves, showing a hatch. then going down to open it. As I went down too to help her, I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder where the bullet hit me, but I did not care too much. She succeeded in opening the hatch, but something blocked the full opening. A few bullets burst from inside as the rustle from behind came closer, and I knew that if there is to get in, we should do it fast. She shouted something in Russian or Ukrainian. A male voice responded from below. They argued a bit until I said, "If he lets us in, do it in the next seconds. It is very close." As a spider about the size of a 10-year-old child was only a few meters away, she started to plead, and it worked. The man managed to push the improvised barricade at the hatch to let us in. The woman went first. As the creature came closer, I struggled to turn around in order to keep my eyes on the spider as it was inches from me. I placed, without realizing it, the flashlight towards the creature. Two things happened at the same time. First one, I saw a being that was deeply dark, so dark that it made shiver, emanating something like it wanted to consume me as fast as possible, something I could feel in its eyes that I could not distinguish, but that I could feel strongly they were there, in that giant black mass. The second one was that the creature stopped in its tracks when the beam of light hit where I felt the eyes were for a few seconds. Those seconds were enough for me to get through the hatch. I tried to close it, but the pain in the shoulder made me unable to pull, and a dark shape covered the little light coming from outside. Coldness took over my body, and the stench made me nauseated. I could hear sounds of a mouth chewing nothing, in anticipation of chewing my flesh. A harsh, sticky, hairy, black, articulated arm entered just for a few seconds, before a bullet from inside hit the arm. A shriek with splatter, and the arm retreated, just enough as a thin man, wearing a Russian uniform came, pulled the hatch, then locked it. Fortunately, I did not drop the flashlight, and a second flashlight, held by the man, made enough light to see underneath. It was a small underground structure, more like a refuge. I am not sure if this was to be a refuge or some storage place, since many provisions seemed to be deposited, mostly crates covered in dark green canvases. The man went towards the end of the corridor. There were a few rooms on the left and right, but he went to a larger one at the end. Some chairs, a blanket, some food on the floor, guns. The two spoke in Russian and or Ukrainian. "Sorry to interrupt, folks. Could we speak English, please? I do not know either Russian or Ukrainian," I said. They stopped and looked at me. He answered, "Okay then, it makes sense." I looked at him. He appeared around the age of 40, pretty thin and short, but stocky in a way. His almost complete shaved head was covered with a small military cap. "What is going on?" I said. They stood silent for a few seconds. Then the man started, not breathing too easily, like trying to remain calm. We fought for about 2 days before they came. We did not plan shooting into Romanian territory, but as casualties arose in such a short time, weirdness started. As lack of sleep builded up, some of us start to act weird, not all in the same way. At first they were only dreams and hallucinations. I do not think they were hallucinations now, of being attacked in their beds by some small creatures. Some showed small scars on their bodies, but they were dismissed since we were in the middle of a battle. Some started to turn on each other. The colonel ordered detention, then all who behaved aggressively were shot. The Ukrainians kept fighting. We had to fight back. Soon, we did not know how much we fought the enemy and how much we fought each other. I did not know who I could trust, if I could follow orders or not. Then those things started to appear. I did not pay much attention to them, trying to keep myself from being killed by my comrades. But I could not deny it when I first saw a black spider near the edge of the camp, eating away from the still living body of our cook. I managed to get close to Yuri, one of my comrades who felt still sane, and we retreated in the center of the camp until the order came to leave a large part of the equipment and get into the woods near the border, and we were dragged alongside the rest. In the fields, those creatures attacked us, some trying to fight back, but even from those who we still able to understand, this is a new, non-human enemy we had to deal against, seemed too confused and unable to fight back properly. I heard we were about to clash with the Ukrainian foe, that the Romanians seemed to have crossed the border as a response of the provocation, when me and Yuri managed to run away and get into the woods on our own. but the spiders were there, more of them and larger. Yuri was caught by a very large one just before I stumbled across the hatch. I found my way in and barricaded the entrance. The woman started. Pretty similar things happened to us as well. Small spiders were seen at first, biting people, who started acting weird. Unfortunately, our colonel was affected pretty early on and started just shooting people. The major shot the colonel and shouted, "He is the new commander!" Some protested, and someone I could not identify shot the major. The floodgates were open and my comrades started turning on each other. I hid myself up to a point. Then, like in his case, I was taken with the flow as the people started to head towards the woods. I gave a sigh and looked at them. You know, my country may be enemies with any of your countries. I understand not to talk about certain aspects, but right now, what matters is that those things are a common enemy, and in the end, all of us are human. We need to work together to escape. They looked at me, the woman smiled and nodded. The man gave a sigh and nodded as well. I think it is okay to introduce ourselves. I am Sergeant Raresh Buzescu, Romanian Army. The woman said, Lieutenant Olena Kirkova, Ukrainian Army. The man said, Private Dmitry Fyodorov, Russian Army. We shook hands and started talking on a strategy. Olena tried to help me with my shoulder. Some stinky goo was on my uniform. Fortunately, it was barely more than a scratch, and she managed to keep it covered from the goo. We ate a bit, took some vodka, then went to the entrance to listen. I found out that Dmitry was from Yekaterinburg, that he lost his father when he was in primary school. He told us he used to be religious as a child, then he became colder into faith, but not atheist. He told us he prayed for the first time in a while tonight, and he feels that only God can help us. Olena told us that she was from Kiev, that she joined the army years ago, that she was always a competitive girl as a child and teen, who loved female action heroes, that she was a convinced feminist. Then, after a while, being disappointed in real-life military life, left it and became a hairstylist. She held a YouTube channel where she posted ASMR videos with haircuts, hairstyling and massages, while being dressed sexy. The channel gained some following. She did some interventions, like pumping her lips. She planned breast augmentation. When war came, she was called to arms, on the basis of her previous formation. I told them that I was from Suceava in the north, that I was not particularly religious, that I became a soldier due to the war games and RPGs I played as a teen, and that I justified it to myself somewhat, thinking of the patriotic literature I was taught in primary school. I told them I was never truly religious, that I went to the Easter service, to weddings and funerals, and that was about it. Dmitry told me it makes a good idea to start praying now, and he showed us the cross his late grandmother gave him, that he never stopped wearing. The surroundings were mostly silent, but we did not dare to come out, as we still felt their presence, like waiting for us to get out. I started. Those flashlights shall not be out of battery soon. The night is still pretty long, so we need to decide quickly what to do. I hear them screeching on the outside. Is there any way for them to break in? Olena replied, There are some ventilation shafts sideways as far as I know, but they are pretty narrow. I don't know if there are little ones. As they seem to change size, they may enter. I say to secure them, I answered. They agreed, and we started searching each chamber for the vents. They were pretty narrow. They were not hard to cover with cloth, although the metal covers were kind of rusty. We have had enough supplies for a few days, and decided to put the flashlights off and stick them together near the entrance, and watch the clock from time to time. We allowed ourselves to sleep for about 90 minutes at a time, but never all at once. As we sat, we felt like some force, let's say, I cannot find a better term, in the air, something that took away, slowly, my will to fight and live, and I started not just feel, but also live like it was just a question of time before I shall become the meal of the creatures, like they spread something in the very air we breathed, and it entered our tissues. Neither of them seemed to know if this was a weapon of either armies. They seemed sincere enough. Dmitry started praying. He said he felt like it. The Paraclesis of the Mother of God, then the Acatist of St. Demetrios of Thessaloniki, who was his patron saint. We felt a clear release from the shadow on our souls, although not totally. I dared to have a little sleep. Then Olena fell asleep alongside me. Suddenly, Dmitry woke us up. There is something in the first room on the right, he said. We secured them. What can it be? I asked. I do not know. Let's have a look, he answered. We managed to get up and open our flashlights and get into there. There was something screeching in there behind a wooden box. Carefully, Dmitri removed it to discover a dead mouse, and behind it, a hole between the floor and the wall, probably made by mice. Olena gave a sigh of relief, probably thinking it was a mouse. Dmitri looked carefully around, pointing with the flashlight around. I felt dread. I knew that was not a mouse that made those sounds, even if it used, probably, the mouse hole to enter. With my flashlight, I managed to get a glimpse of something larger than a rat, something black that ran away from my light, before jumping upon Dmitri's left leg and piercing the flesh through the pants. I hurried to help him, and I saw a black spider, larger than a tarantula, firmly embedded in his leg. Pointing the light upon it, it gave some sort of screech. It was clearly uncomfortable with the light, but it held on. I grabbed my knife and tried to stab it, between the head and the abdomen. It was not easy, as I had to be careful not to get bitten myself. Dmitri fell to the ground, and I used his lack of balance to crush the neck of the spider with the knife, and a black, sticky fluid came out of it. Dmitri grabbed it with a piece of canvas and pulled it out fast, with a grimace of pain, breaking its head from the rest. "No, you should not have done that," said Olena, going down next to him. "The mouthpieces will remain in the flesh." Dmitri was panting, as the fluid started to stick to his clothes, and the clothes to the skin. "Fast. We need to remove the head and the pants." I was a bit confused, since I did not know what to do. "We need to improvise. I shall try with a knife." What followed was a kind of brutish improvisation. I am not sure how much Olena knew what she was doing. She tried to pull out the mouthpieces from the wound with the knife. I think she kind of fumbled. I actually tried to call in Romania, since the border was close and I might have got some signal, but it did not work. Olena tried to wash the wound with some vodka. Dmitri endured pretty stoically, only with some moans. "We need to get him to a hospital as fast as we can. This could be lethal soon," said Olena. "Either death or losing my mind, like those before me," replied Dmitri. "No, I do not think there is any way to reach any hospital soon. I think this is it." "Stop it," said Olena. "With this attitude you shall die surely. Without it, at least you have a chance." Dmitri started laughing bitterly. "No, I know it, I feel. This is how it is supposed to happen. I prayed earlier. I am quite at peace now. You can either let me die, or, if I get insane like the others, you can either shoot me or send me out to eat me." Olena looked at him with a mix of anger and frustrated desperation, but Dmitri continued. "One of us needs to die in order for the rest to escape. They shall enter this place before dawn, one way or the other. They are really hungry, and we know it. I prayed when you thought I was sleeping. I remember how Saint Demetrios, my patron saint, the Christian military imprisoned for Christ, prayed in prison that Nestorius, the Christian fighter, would defeat the giant champion of the pagans, Laios, like David defeated Goliath. I remembered how, when the pagans discovered that the prayer of Saint Demetrios helped defeat Laios, they killed him, and he became a martyr. Tonight is his night, the night between summer and winter. The choice is yours, mine if already taken." "No!" shouted Olena. "Cut the crap! We shall all escape! We shall take you to the hospital! We shall escape this!" She started to make plans out loud on how to leave. My heart felt something in the words of Dmitri, like some power was in him, like a little bit of the peace he had come to me as well. Earlier, when I fought outside, I never prayed a bit, but now I started to feel like doing it, just by looking at him. Nonetheless, I helped Olena, both in discussing tactics and in putting them in practice. We improvised some torches from pieces of wooden box with cloth and vodka to keep them away. We also improvised some Molotov cocktails from vodka bottles and cloth. Olena was very pushy about this, and I really admired her for that, as I admired Dmitri for his attitude. In a way, both of them were completing each other. "You know," said Dmitri, courting, "I have heard about things like that years ago. It is not the first time this has happened. They came where people fight and kill each other. It makes them stronger. They are greedy in suffering and death. They are terribly powerful, but they are not by far undefeatable. I never heard anyone escaping something like what we go through now, but I trust the Lord that you have a chance, and in case you didn't escape, be ready to die. Ask for the Lord to forgive you for all your transgressions. Say your sins to each other. It is not like confessing them to a priest, but it matters. I shall start myself. Whatever I tell you now, tell a priest you trust. This is my final confession." And he started telling us his sins. As we prepared, we could not stop him. What he told us then I shall not disclose. but I told to a priest after I escaped. Olena refused to confess in front of us, and that made me reluctant to do it either. Dimitri gave a sigh, as all was ready. Forgive each other. Love each other. Please forgive me for everything. Pray as much as you can. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Be prepared for both life and death. Death will seem certain, but it is not. By this time he was already courting bad. His face became bluish-grey. He could not walk on his own. I took him and helped walk on the stairs. Olena held both a torch and a gun. I held only a torch. She opened the hatch, a cold breeze that felt like it would have frozen my bones if it weren't something else holding me, both me and Olena. The webs were all over the trees. The air was thick and difficult to breathe, like it intoxicating us with terror and hopelessness. One side of me realized all this, and the other side was tranquil. The result was like watching all this detached somehow. We used the compass to determine where south was, and the plan was to go south as much as possible to exit the woods. We stepped out. No rain, only an autumn breeze. We felt them around. We felt the trees above us, but they did not move. I helped him walk a bit. Then he signaled me I better let him walk on his own. I was reluctant to, but I complied. After a few meters, I realized he backed out a few steps. I turned to him. Olena turned as well. A spider the size of a large dog came out from the canopy and stabbed him in the back, but he was still standing. Olena opened her mouth in terror. I could not move. Dimitri spoke. I don't know how he was able to speak since he was stabbed in the back. Christ is victorious already. You need to accept to be victorious in him. Go now. The Mother of God is with you. The Lord himself is with you. Go now. And always remember, Christ is victorious. And with that, he fell to the ground, and the spider started devouring him. Something like an iron claw passed through my soul. Olena broke out crying. I don't know how, but something pushed me. I took the gun from her and grabbed her arm and started running towards the first clear path we could see. The air was really thick, hard to breathe, not like a city smog, but like something else. It was a clear night, not very cold, but I felt like I was in a frozen giant basement cage, surrounded by a crowd of predators that allow me to live for a few more seconds, not for my sake, but because they compete with each other to have me. The webs were all over the place. We could not just feel them almost all around, not just hear them, but also see them in the trees. We needed to run. If we stayed in one place, their mere presence would build up some sort of poisonous fear that would take over soon, the building up being unavoidable even if they do not grab us. I lost track of sense and direction. I went into any clear passage between the trees. The torches kept them at bay for a little, only for a few moments. I knew that if we stopped, they would gain courage and strength to take us, but it was enough. Olena cried muffledly. I felt her strength going down. Do not let go, sister, now. You remember how you saved me earlier? Now is my turn, I said. God is with us. We should rely on him now. There is no other way. The last phrase came out of my mouth half without realizing it. For a second of disbelief, I looked out into the front of us. On the path, there was a big spider, almost 2 meters long. I saw no immediate escape. Olena felt feeble, like she just wanted to kneel and give up. I shouted, Lord, protect us! Mother of God, cover us! Saint Demetrius, help us! I was quiet for a second, then said gently, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on us, the sinners. I fired the gun into the creature. I gave a horrible shriek, backed up. Olena stood up, like something gave her a boost of energy, of life. We saw another clearing and we ran towards there. We stumbled upon webs several times, only barely touching them. At one point, Olena got stuck with her shoulder in one web. It was nothing serious, but a spider the size of a dog came pretty fast. I managed to set the web on fire before breaking Olena free. The fire started to spread pretty fast. They feared fire, as even light from a flashlight was probably unpleasant for them. Less than 3 meters away, the darkness ate away the light. It was surely not a natural darkness. I could not stare at it too much, as it made me feel like I was sinking into something unreal. In a way, it was like quicksand for the mind. I almost stumbled several times. On the forest floor, we often stumbled upon human bones or piles of goo that had some leftovers like pieces of clothing, showing that they were part of a human body. We circled around several times because we found ourselves again in front of the flames. They were more widespread. It was clear they hated all the fire. Their shrieks turned into some type of screams that could easily break someone who is faint of heart. It was like they went into my very bones. The fire was our only hope. Olena was breathing heavily. It was clear that she could not resist too much. I stopped for a few seconds and looked into her eyes. She tried to be tough, but she was clearly pretty close to giving up. I said, "Look, they are afraid of fire. I do not know if it is to exit from this, but at least we can take down as many as we can. We have several Molotov cocktails. I shall hang the gun on my shoulder and ask your help in getting them out of my haversack and light them up, to throw them into more places in the woods, to get as many of them down as possible. Do you think you can do it?" Olena looked faint at me. I crossed myself, then I crossed her. Indeed, as Dimitri said, the Jesus prayer helps. At my signal, light them up and throw them. Please, at least try. Olena smiled and tried to settle herself in the new arrangement, and we left just as a pretty big spider got close to us. We moved into an area that was far from the fire. I asked Olena to light up one of the bottles. It was really hard to do it while we walked, but she managed to. We soon had the chance, since there was a big one in a tree wanting to jump at us. I took the bottle and sent it into the spider. The tree got on fire fast and we ran. Olena seemed into some new energy state, but it felt like it was something from outside. We repeated it several times. The fire took over different parts of the forest. The fear in my mind not just got stronger, but it started to blow like a wind. It felt huge anger from the creatures that turned into hatred. We prayed the Jesus prayer almost ceaselessly, just to keep us standing. Mentally, it was like running a marathon on a very narrow path, with the mountain slope on one point and a deep precipice on the other. We finished the bottles, and I started firing the gun over and over, as those things came more and more towards us, and faster. At some point, we remained out of bullets. We were held by something or someone. No way we could have survived and not break. We could have lost it or died 100 times. At some point, Olena stumbled and fell to the ground. Her torch fell to the ground as she laid down, breathing heavily. I tried to wake her up. She was clearly at the end of her strength. She went to sleep on the leaves. At that moment, two things happened, one through the other. A dark shadow, greater than the darkness I was already accustomed with, covered us, and with thuds, giant articulated legs surrounded us, covering almost the entire clearing. It was good that Olena fell to sleep then, and she did not face the giant beast above us. I did not dare to look at it, as drops of unholy toxic saliva fell upon us. I heard the chattering of a giant mouth ready to chew us at once in such haste that it would not take its time to cover us into a cocoon and suck us. Even the invisible dark eyes felt like wanting to devour us, to suck us in a second before the mouth reached us. I do not know how the stench did not make me pass out at once. And the second thing was that for a moment I looked at one side of the clearing, and I could see the field and the clear night sky. Mother of God, help us! Lord, have mercy on us! Perhaps my heart would have just stopped before the mouth ever touched me, when I heard a voice, perhaps in my mind, I do not know, the voice of Dimitri, who said, "Get up and place the torch into its mouth, then take the small knife from your boot and push it inside the enemy now." Perhaps my heart stopped beating, I do not know. I was already almost gone, but a terrible, yet amazing force took me up and made me push the torch inside my mouth. That force felt like a shield that protected us from death, or from having our minds blown by the scream, so that I was able to get the knife out of the boot and stab the being close to the mouth. The torch fell to the ground. The creature stood up in pain, and that invisible force made me, or helped me, take Olena in my arms, rise and start running, inside the tornado I was in. I do not know how I found myself out in the fields, running with Olena in my arms, sleeping. Unearthly screams were heard behind us, from the woods, and I heard the creature coming towards us at an immense speed. I was like skydiving at a huge speed. I heard one last huge scream and a blast. I stopped and looked back. The being exploded out in the fields as the forest was on fire. I grabbed Olena and continued running. As we moved away from danger, my strength diminished. I let her down in the grass and tried to wake her up. She opened her eyes and gave a sigh. "It is over," I said. "The Lord saved us. He worked through Dimitri. Praise be the Lord." She started crying. I gave her a hug. The holidays are always an emotionally very confusing time for me. I love the decorations, the festive mood, but I also feel a melancholy nostalgia that lingers in the back of my mind. Not a yearning for younger times, but vague childhood trauma and family inadequacies bubbling to the surface. My sister and I individually still live in our hometown. My parents do too, and so did my grandparents. I have no desire to move. I do really like it here. That doesn't mean, though, that I'm not affected by the proximity of parts of my past. I practice Wicca in a modern, cultural sense. I was raised loosely Catholic, and I still celebrate Christmas, but I also celebrate the Wiccan Sabbath of Yule, which overlaps with Christmas. It's nice to be able to have something to share while also having something for yourself to enjoy and experience. This year's holidays were different, though. Surprising, but not shocking, my grandfather died. He was 92, so his passing was not unexpected. Active and mentally alert up until the very end, but still 92. Just the timing of being so close to the holidays was not foreseen in the brief overview of planning for his passing that my parents, sister, and I happened to discuss earlier in the year. Getting funeral arrangements made for December 20th was a pain, but we got it done. We made it simple, a public wake and a private funeral. Of my family, I was the closest to my grandfather, and I felt treating his death arrangements in a more logical, left brain matter just made sense and wasn't insensitive at all. He would have wanted people to move on quickly and continue with their lives. I learned of Wicca from my grandfather. Many people are surprised to hear that being Wiccan, or a witch, is not just some New Age fad. My grandmother was Wiccan too. My mother, their daughter, decided not to practice, which is of course totally fine and her decision. I decided though that Wicca really aligned with my values and felt best for me. Cooking, especially baking, is a main aspect of my practice. Since I was a kid, my grandfather and I would bake together in his big kitchen. Savoury or sweet galettes, depending on the season. Witch's bread pudding using buttery brioche bread, and much more. 9 out of 10 times we made perfect creations. Wicca is very much individual-centered. While my grandfather and I practiced together, he also encouraged me to develop my own practice for myself as he did his own. When my grandmother died 3 years ago, it was nice to see that he had a system in place for himself to process the grief in a healthy way. What exactly that system was when he was alone, I'm unsure, but it worked for him. Speaking of speedy death arrangements, I happened to get a call from my grandfather's lawyer maybe 10 minutes after the funeral. He wanted to go over my grandfather's will. He was able to arrange a meeting for my family and I to come into his office the following day. The convenience was very nice. We all sat down in front of the attorney's desk. It's honestly one of the most simplified wills I've ever been designated to carry out, the lawyer said. As he stated in his will, you are already aware he is donating most of his money to charities and causes he cared deeply about. However, he left $10,000 total to divide amongst the 4 of you equally. Thankfully, we all understood and acknowledged that we knew this well in advance. No one contested it. The lawyer handed each of us a check for $2,500. The lawyer proceeded. The only thing left is this. The lawyer lifted up onto his desk a small, old wooden chest that was maybe a foot wide and half a foot tall. The dark brown of the wood was almost black, which matched the black metal of the hinges, lock, and corner edge plating. This is for you, Zach. The lawyer handed me the chest. My family looked at me inquisitively but said nothing. Right then and there I tried to open the chest, but it was locked. Is there a key? I asked. No, the lawyer replied firmly. The lawyer then stated that my mother was designated as the executor of his estate, or what would happen with the rest of his belongings like his home. That concluded the will distribution, and the lawyer ushered us out the door because he assumingly had other things to do. The plan was we would all get together for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at my parents' house, which was normal for us, unfortunately. I drove back to my place. I put my keys down in the bowl by the door and took the chest into the kitchen, where I placed it on the dining room table. I made myself a mug of herbal tea and then sat in front of the chest, thinking, should I try to pick the lock? Do I try and pry it open? I gently shook the chest. I couldn't hear anything inside. Was it just decorative? That doesn't seem like something my grandfather would leave in a will. Wicca tends to be utilitarian, and that's how my grandfather was. Practical, but not in an emotionally detached way at all. He didn't like giving or receiving gifts. He liked to show his care by providing experiences, acts of service, words of affection. Baking was a clear example of giving an experience of the senses. I left the chest on the table and decided to light a fire in the fireplace. Some find it contradictory, or a dichotomy. I don't know. Anyway, people find it weird that I use natural kindling from the woods, but put one of those packaged logs you light on top of it. To continue the theme of Wicca, I think it's a perfect representation of the practice, old and new together. I lit the fire, and it immediately went up in a roar and then settled down. It's a traditional fireplace. It doesn't use major flammables like gas. The wood must have been really dry. A moment after the fire settled, I heard a thud come from the kitchen. I got a little scared. Just in case, I grabbed the fire poker hanging near the fireplace and slowly walked to the kitchen. Stepping into the kitchen, I looked around. Nothing was there. The door that connected the garage to the kitchen that I normally walk through was closed, and so were the windows. I looked over at the dining room table and saw the chest. That was open. I walked over to it and looked inside. I had to blink a few times to make sure nothing was in my eyes, and that what I was seeing was actually what I was seeing. There were 11 teeth scattered within the chest. A shiver shot up my spine. Teeth, real human teeth. How did I not hear at least a rattling when I shook the chest? The question in itself made me uncomfortable. Whose teeth were they? I had to assume they were my grandfather's. Where else would he get human teeth? I thought of the worst possible scenario. Did he hurt someone to get these? I was just being paranoid in the moment. I never saw my grandfather get even remotely angry at anything. I don't think I ever even saw him slightly irritated. Is that a good trait, or the trait of a psychopath? I needed to calm down. I know my grandfather. Horribly, these had to be his teeth, and the coroner or funeral people didn't notify us because, for some odd reason, they didn't see his missing teeth as abnormal. Maybe they just thought he had poor dental hygiene. There was a part of me that wanted to pick them up and inspect them, but the shock was still subsiding in me, so I didn't. It's an old chest. It must have been spring-loaded and broken open. I left the open chest there and decided to bring my tea over to the couch near the fireplace and just relax. I would try reading a book I was almost done with and organize my thoughts about this discovery after. I decided not to tell my parents and sister, at least not so close to Christmas. Again, I already feel weird around my family this time of year. It's not an emergency, and I wouldn't want to sour their Christmas and create more tension, just like I wouldn't want my Yule shaken up like that. If I was going to tell them what Grandpa left me, I would wait until after the holidays. Only 3 to 5 pages into reading, I started to smell a really pungent odor. It wasn't bad smelling, just really strong. It was cinnamon. I didn't add anything to my tea. I thought maybe some of the wood I was burning could be producing a smell. I went over to the fireplace, but it wasn't that. I remembered I had mini cinnamon brooms hanging outside each of my house's doors. I thought that was ridiculous, because how could they suddenly become that strong in smell? But I checked anyway. I opened the front door and the cinnamon smell hit me like a wave. Yes, it was ever so clear that it was coming from the cinnamon brooms. When I bought them, you literally had to put your nose up to them to smell the slight scent they held. Now, it was as though the scent radiated off them like a nuclear reactor. I checked the one outside the connecting garage door, and it too was overwhelming. For those that don't know, in Wicca, it's tradition to hang a cinnamon or spiced broom outside your door during the colder season's Sabbats, especially Samhain, Halloween and Yule. It's a very contemplative time of the year. The brooms protect your home from bad energy and ground you in the physical realm, while the veil between life and death is thin. They're symbolic. The same concept applied to lighting fires in the fireplace. Whether you notice it or not, air circulates through homes constantly. Air pressure changes dramatically simply by opening and closing doors. My home is on the older side, so I thought there must have been a particular draft where a wind was strongly wafting in the scent of the brooms toward my house, and then through tight spaces, even though the doors and windows were closed. I really couldn't think of any other way. I went back to reading. I finished my book, Albert Camus' The Fall. I liked The Stranger better, but overall this was a good read too. It was around 9:00 p.m. The glowing fire had relaxed me with its light flickering within the room. However, that feeling left. My heart sank a little. I remembered I needed to do something with the chest of teeth. I turned and saw it on the table. With the lights off, it mainly just looked like a darker black spot within an already dark room. I finished my tea, which was cold at this point. I decided to just leave the chest there. I'll get a good night's sleep and figure out what to do with it tomorrow. I put out the fire with cold ashes, showered and went to bed. I jolted up, leaning forward in bed. I'd woken up feeling panic. I checked my phone. It was 3:00 a.m. There was silence. Did I have a nightmare? I took a few deep breaths. As I was going to lay back down, I heard a faint sound. It went away after a few seconds. I heard it again. I was certain it was the sound of children giggling. I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside or somewhere inside the house. I checked my phone again. I didn't accidentally have any audio playing. I thought it must be the Alexa playing something downstairs. I got out of bed, and the immediate feel of the cold wood floors on the bottoms of my feet added to the tension in the air. I have a semi-auto shotgun in my room's gun locker, but I felt getting it out would be excessive. I slowly made my way down the stereotypically creaky stairs. Not even fully down the stairs, I saw the red light from the Alexa, which means I indeed did not forget to turn it off before bed. No sound was playing. The on and off sound of children giggling had stopped. The pungent smell of cinnamon still filled the air downstairs. I turned the living room and kitchen lights on and began to look around. On the kitchen counter next to the stove, my bag of baking flour was sitting there, open. The windows and doors were still closed and locked. I looked outside the front and back windows. No one was out there. Nothing was disturbed or out of place, minus the bag of flour being out. I then saw the chest on the counter, of course, still sitting there. I went over to it. I felt a desire to see its contents again, still not believing what the chest held. Looking inside, I saw it was completely empty. The teeth were gone. The doors and windows began to shake violently. I could hear the hinges rattling, but they stood strong. The child laughter came back loud. I realized the laughter was coming from outside the house, all around. It was utter chaos. It felt like a fever dream. Clearly, it was now not excessive to go get my shotgun. I ran upstairs, got it out of the safe, and ran back downstairs. I didn't know where to look. The laughter was coming from the doors, the windows, the roof, everywhere, but I could see nothing. Then, as quickly as it came, it was silent. The doors and windows stopped shaking. The laughter stopped. The cinnamon smell dissipated. I stood there, in a sweat, holding my shotgun. I felt scared yet relieved at the same time. I don't like the police. People roll their eyes at me when I say it, but I believe in community self-defense. I did not call them to report this, nor was I in the mood to go outside and investigate. Maybe this was a deranged, elaborate prank from neighborhood kids, who I didn't know lived on this street. Maybe I was hallucinating. I went to the kitchen where I keep my medication to check that I hadn't missed any doses, or taken more than I should have by accident. I happened to see the bottle of melatonin I recently bought, 10 milligauss. Of course, I usually take 3 milligram tablets and only take melatonin occasionally. I must have not been paying attention when I bought it, and forgotten that I took some melatonin before bed and my body was reacting strangely negatively. I'm always sensitive like that. I literally have to stop drinking coffee at least 8 to 9 hours before bed because of the caffeine. I double-checked the doors just to soothe my mind. They were still locked. So were the windows. I even checked the chimney chute. That was closed too. I left everything as it was. The lights on, the flour bag, the chest. I just left it as is. I went back upstairs and put my gun away. I laid my head to rest. It took me about an hour to go back to bed, but I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I showered, got dressed, and went downstairs. Everything was fine. The lights were off, and the flour bag was in the kitchen cupboard. The doors and windows were still closed and locked. I made some coffee and went to head out to run some errands. Right as I was leaving, a thought entered my mind. The missing teeth. I went over to the chest and looked inside. The teeth were back where they were. Well, I figured they were always there. I figured everything was what and where it normally was. The melatonin just messed me up last night. I brushed it off and left the house. I came back home about an hour and a half later. There were still some leaves falling from the trees from fall, so I went outside and did some raking. The crisp, cold air was refreshing and cleared my lungs. I paused for a moment. It was a nice feeling, but the air had a tension to it. No, more so a very slight vibration, a presence, an anticipation lingering in the background. I chopped it up to the weird, seasonal imbalance. Fall holding on tight, not letting winter fully sink in, climate destruction making every year warmer. I finished raking, put the paper bags of leaves on the curb, and went inside. I made another fire in the fireplace and got cozy with a new book. It got dark quickly. Shortly into reading, the fire did a roar. It was the same quick blaze that occurred when I lit it the day before, but now just on its own, not right when I lit it. I thought that I needed to be more careful with the wood I chose because it was getting dangerous. Maybe 30 seconds after that, the giggling started. The children's laughter slowly began to surround the house. I quickly accepted that this wasn't last night's excuse, I told myself. This wasn't me. This was real. I got up and headed toward the front door to investigate when my grandfather's box on the table, which I continued to not do something about, began to shake in its place. I slowly walked up to it. It shook violently. The teeth again were gone. The doors and windows began to shake again. The children's laughter grew and got louder. The scent of the cinnamon brooms became overwhelming. I ran upstairs and grabbed my gun. When I came back downstairs, rushed to the door and almost turned the doorknob. Something stopped me. I felt a sudden feeling that stopped me in my place, telling me not to open the door. A part of me wanted to proceed, but I continued to feel the sudden emotion guiding me to stay inside. Do not open the door. I walked backward to the center of the room and just stood there. I let everything just occur. The fire roared again but continued blazing instead of the one quick burst it had done twice before. The chest shook even more violently, and so did the doors and windows. The stench of the cinnamon stung my nostrils. The children's laughter increasingly became deeper and deeper until it sounded purely demonic. It was booming all throughout the outside of the house. I just stood there. I stood in my place and protected my home. If it, whatever it was, came inside, I would defend myself. I had no other choice. Amongst the cacophony, another sound did manage to make itself known. The short, clear ding of my oven's timer. As it did its single ring, everything stopped. The fire went back to normal. The chest, doors, and windows stopped shaking. The cinnamon scent died off. The laughter was gone. I went back over to the chest, and the teeth had returned. It was all over. What was also there was the bag of flour, back on the kitchen counter. For the rest of the Yule season, I left the chest open on the table. The day Yule ended, I closed the chest and put it on the shelf in the living room closet. My grandfather taught me when I was younger of the Yule children. Some Wiccan cultures like witches in Iceland call them the Yule lads. I was always taught of them as strictly a symbolic tale to uplift the idea of protective energy in your home. I was told the group of at least 13 mischievous children were from a witch couple that practiced dark magic. They were supposedly the souls of children who did not pass over due to random accidents or unexplained reasons, from parents of those in a nearby village of the witches who lived in the woods or mountains, depending on which recollection. The witches would call to the spirits to stay with them, and these 13 did. Eventually, the witch couple suddenly died. It is said they sacrificed themselves to some entity unknown. I had Christmas with my family and went back to my normal life. What else could I do? Call the police? What I experienced was what I experienced. It was real. People experience supernatural events all the time, some true and some fake or misinterpreted. This was no Wiccan myth. Instead, I saw it as a positive and profound event that, if anything, confirmed for myself my spiritual practice even more. It was a miracle. Months passed, and Halloween season came around. My favorite Sabbath, Samhain. I was in the kitchen baking to really bring a warm feeling to the home on a chilly fall night. I could hear the wind rustling the leaves outside. It was really nice. I put the dish into the oven and set the timer. Then, the sound of slight shaking occurred. I walked into the living room to see where the sound was coming from. I listened. It was coming from the closet. I walked over to the closed closet door. Yes, it was coming from inside. I knew it was the chest. It had to be. I just stood there. I didn't know what to do. Do I bring the chest back out on the table? Do I leave it where it is and let whatever happens happen? I just really didn't know what to do. I still don't know what to do with my grandfather's teeth. When I first saw the job listing, I thought it was a scam. Night attendant needed. Historic Arcadian hotel. Must be reliable, detail-oriented, and trustworthy. Pays $500 per shift. The rate sounded unreal. Too good to be true, but too good to pass up, especially considering my dwindling bank account. The email response arrived less than a day after I applied. They attached a quick questionnaire, then sent a brief email confirming that I'd been hired and was expected to report that night. The day before my shift, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside, a small brass key, along with a second envelope containing a check for $500 and a handwritten note. Congratulations and welcome to the Arcadian family. Enclosed is your master key. You'll need this key to let yourself in and access certain parts of the hotel. Enter through the main doors by 10 p.m. Your first shift begins promptly at 11 p.m. Training will be available in the back room behind the front desk. Please watch all training materials before starting your shift. We appreciate your commitment to rebuilding the legacy of the Arcadian. Curious, and admittedly a little nervous, I made my way to the hotel that night. The Arcadian was just as I'd imagined. The exterior was a fading memory of elegance, worn stone walls with crumbling edges, tall windows with elegant exterior spotlights that no longer worked. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 9:45. I had time. The hotel's lobby was huge, dominated by a grand staircase. Dust layered every surface, and the faintest whiff of mildew hung in the air. I took a breath, suppressing a shiver, and walked toward the front desk. Behind it was a small door labeled Staff Only. This must be where they wanted me to watch the training. Inside the staff room, I found a TV set atop a rolling cart and a row of numbered VHS tapes stacked next to it. The first tape had a label on it in looping script, Arcadian Employee Training, 1952. Next to it was a sheet of paper with instructions. Watch all tapes in order. Do not skip ahead. I slid the first tape into the VHS player and turned on the TV. The screen flickered, a hum crackling through the speakers, and then it jumped to life. A video came up, which looked in rough shape, like it was a copy of a copy. A cheerful man in a sharp 1950s suit stood in front of a pristine version of the lobby I'd just walked through. "Welcome to the Arcadian family," he began with a polished grin. "We are delighted to have you on board as a steward of one of New York's finest luxury establishments." His tone was light, upbeat, but he had a strange way of pausing, just momentarily, between each sentence to smile. "Let's begin with a few simple rules to keep our guests safe and happy," he continued. "Remember, our guests may at times be unique, but they deserve the utmost courtesy and the finest of service. Now, please follow these essential guidelines." The first few videos went over the basics. Instructions on how to clean, address guests, check-ins and check-outs, when to check the guest log, and where to find supplies. But on the final video, things took a took for the strange. "Congratulations on making it to the end of your training. Attaboy! Now, let's cover a few final essentials to keep our guests smiling and keep you right as rain. Listen close now. These pointers are real important. Rule number 1, if the elevator takes you to the basement, do not be alarmed. Simply close your eyes and stand still until it moves back up. No peeking. The man chuckled in a practiced, rehearsed way, as though he'd been told to laugh but wasn't sure why. My stomach twisted at his words. The basement? Why would the elevator just take me to the basement? Rule number 2, if you find a guest wandering the halls between 2 and 4 a.m., gently escort them back to their room. Under no circumstances should you allow them near the front doors. Use a firm hand if needed. If they seem upset, simply assure them that it will all be over soon. A chill ran through me. What kind of guest would be staying here anyway? The hotel wasn't even open. I tried to shake off the unease. The man's smile remained fixed as he went on with the rules. Rule number 3, do not look into the mirrors after midnight. Our mirrors sure are something else. We wouldn't want you to become disoriented. Rule number 4, every night count all the keys on the board. Make sure all your keys are accounted for. Most importantly, there should always be 4 keys marked for the 10th floor. If one of those keys are missing, lock up the lobby doors, turn off the lights, and wait behind the front desk until dawn. Do not attempt to look for it. 10th floor, I thought. The hotel doesn't even have 10 floors. He proceeded with a few more rules. Rule number 5. Now listen closely, folks. If a gentleman with a yellow umbrella comes in asking, "Do you have a vacancy?" you must politely reply, "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." No matter how upset he gets, stay calm and cheerful. That's the way to keep things running smoothly. Rule number 6. Attention, night owl. If you find that key 309 is missing at the start of your shift, here's what you do. Whip up a ham and cheese sandwich, gather those supplies from the kitchen, then head on over to room 309 and give a polite knock. Remember, don't make eye contact. Just hold out that plate and wait until you hear the door close before you step away. You've got it. Rule number 7. Now let's talk about Ronald, our cleaning ace. He'll waltz in and say, "I'm here to clean the mess." To which you'll unlock the custodian closet and let Ronald take it away. If he doesn't give you that magic phrase, simply say, "No cleaning needed tonight, Ronald," and don't forget to lock the doors tight after he leaves. That's how we keep everything shipshape. Last but not least, rule number 8. Now listen up, friends. It's important you remember this. Never, and I mean never, enter the management office. If you happen to find the door slightly ajar, just keep on walking and mind your business. And if you hear any peculiar sounds coming from inside, don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Simply carry on with your tasks. We want to keep everything peachy keen around here. What the I thought. The next few minutes focused on specifics of the hotel layout, explaining what doors led where, how to reset the breaker, and the importance of logging any guest encounters in the shift report binder. The rules he'd given, though, stuck with me like a bad taste. That concludes our training. You're now ready to head on out there and knock it out of the park. Thank you again for your commitment to the Arcadian legacy. Finally, I switched off the TV. By then, it was a little after 11 p.m., so I made my way to the front desk to get a feel for my new workspace. The first part of the night was uneventful. The Arcadian was silent, except for a soft hum. I completed the tasks in the handbook they'd given me, accounting for all the keys, sweeping the lobby, wiping down the desk. It was eerie, but manageable. I settled in behind the front desk, scrolling through my phone and waiting for the night to pass by. At around 1:30 a.m., the front door of the hotel opened. An old man shuffled into the lobby. He wore a faded custodian uniform that looked like it had seen better days, and I could barely make out the name tag reading Ronald as he drew closer. He moved slowly, his feet dragging slightly on the worn carpet, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew I had to wait for him to say the phrase that would confirm he was here for his nightly duties. When he finally reached the desk, he looked up at me with weary eyes and said, "I'm here to clean the mess." A wave of relief washed over me as I realized he'd said it. I quickly unlocked the custodian closet, my hands trembling slightly as I fumbled with the keys. As he pulled out his cart, filled with an assortment of cleaning supplies and tools, he glanced at me, almost amusingly, and asked, "New here?" "Yeah, it's my first night. Any tips?" I replied, eager to learn anything that might ease my nerves. "Stick to the rules and you'll be just fine, kid," he said, before turning back to his cart. He wheeled it toward the elevator, the cart rattling softly behind him. As he stepped inside, the doors closed with a quiet thud, leaving me alone again. Ronald's words did little to ease my nerves. I was still trying to figure out what those rules might really mean, and why seemingly mundane rules would be so important to follow. When I returned to my desk, I noticed almost immediately a space on the key rack. A key was now missing, the key to room 309. Panic rose in my chest as I rifled through the key rack again, hoping it was just hiding among the others. "Where the hell did it go?" I muttered to myself, feeling a bead of sweat form on my forehead. I had barely left the desk for more than a minute. Had someone come in while I was with Ronald? Or had I just missed it during my last count? I quickly pulled out my notes, scanning for the rule about the ham sandwich. There it was. If key 309 is missing, bring a ham and cheese sandwich to the room and knock, avoiding eye contact. I sighed, resigning myself to follow the rule. Heading into the kitchen, I was surprised to find it fully stocked, despite the hotel's long period of inactivity. The shelves were lined with canned goods and an impressive assortment of fresh ingredients, as if someone had prepared for a busy night. I quickly gathered the supplies and assembled a ham sandwich, placing it carefully on a plate. With the plate in hand, I took a deep breath and headed for the elevator. The fluorescent lights flickered as I pressed the button for the third floor, and I felt a twinge of unease as I rode up. When the doors opened, I walked down the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps. I approached room 309 and knocked gently on the door. My heart racing, I heard shuffling inside, and after a moment the door creaked open. I instinctively lowered my head, avoiding any eye contact. A figure stood in the doorway, reaching out to take the plate from my hands. They lingered there for an extra moment, as if waiting to see if I would look up. I kept my head down, my heart pounding in my chest. After a tense pause, the figure shut the door quietly, leaving me standing in the dim hallway, a chill running down my spine. I let out my breath, realizing now that I had been holding it. I turned and walked away, the feeling of being watched weighing heavily on me. What is with this fucking hotel, I thought. I got in the elevator, feeling relieved to head back to the safety of my desk. What were with all these rules anyway? What kind of hotel is this? Questions raced through my brain as I took the ride back down to the lobby. The elevator descended, and as it approached the lobby, I got closer to the doors, anticipating my exit. Only, it didn't stop at the lobby. It kept going down. Panic washed over me as I realized what was happening. The basement. "No, no, no," I said as the elevator descended. I desperately smashed my hand against the buttons, hitting any floor that would possibly bring me back up. But the elevator didn't stop. Forcing myself to calm down, I remembered the rules, and I shut my eyes tightly, clenching my fists at my sides. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened, unleashing a rush of cold air that sent a shiver down my spine. The damp, musty smell filled my nostrils. I stood there, back against the wall, heart pounding, waiting anxiously to see what would happen next. Then I heard something moving, slow and deliberate, getting closer. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut, a putrid stench that filled the air and clawed at my throat. It was a sickening blend of rot and decay that seemed to wrap around me, making it hard to breathe. The elevator creaked, and I felt it move slightly, as if something heavy, very heavy, had entered it. I could feel it, whatever it was, right there, right against me, hovering right in front of my face. My pulse was racing, and tears began to stream down my face. I could feel it staring at me, like a predator, waiting, praying for me to open my eyes. What was probably only seconds felt like an eternity of pure horror. Just then, the doors dinged again, and I felt myself moving back upward. I slowly opened my eyes to find the doors now open, looking back out to the lobby and the grand staircase. I ran out of the elevator, ready to rush out of the front doors and quit, on the spot. But that's when I noticed it. Dawn was breaking outside, and a new envelope was sat on top of the desk. Hesitantly, I opened the envelope, sniffling like a child and wiping the tears from my face. Inside the envelope was another $500 check and a note. Great job on your first shift. As a thank you, we have included your pay up front for tomorrow night. If you choose to not return, feel free to keep the check as a courtesy from us, but we hope you do return. You are a valuable addition to the Arcadian hotel family. Management. I took the check and left the hotel, fully convinced I would never return. That was last night. Back home, I've paced my small apartment all day, the check burning a hole in my pocket and the sunlight giving me a sense of security. I wanted to quit. The nightmares and anxiety of last night are too much. But then I thought about my bills, my empty fridge, the weight of my loans. I've been staring at this check, the memory of Ronald's words echoing in my mind. Stick to the rules, and you'll be just fine, kid. Maybe I can figure it out. Maybe I can endure just a little longer. I've resolved to return to the hotel. I will follow the rules, keep my head down, and stay focused on the prize. Tonight, I will walk into that hotel again, ready to face whatever horrors await me. The money is too enticing to walk away from, and maybe I can even find out whatever is going on with the Arcadian hotel. After all, it's just a job, right?